All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to this special session with Congressman Beyer from the Delray Citizens Association. My name is Elena Hutchison. I'm the vice president of the association. Unfortunately, Tim, our president, is on a flight, so he asked me to moderate this evening. But we're so excited to have Congressman Beyer, as well as his chief of staff, Noah, with us this evening. And really, I think the format for tonight's session is just going to be, maybe 10 minutes or so of remarks from the congressman, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. So you should be able to find, hopefully, a Q&A button that all of our attendees have access to. If you want to put a question in there for the congressman, you can just go ahead and use that Q&A function. There should be an option in there to submit a question anonymously if you want to use that. So we had a lot of questions from federal employees who maybe didn't want their names associated with questions. You should have an option to do that as well. And if you look in the Q&A and you see other people are asking questions that you also have, you can upvote questions there, and that will bring them to the top for me to ask. We are recording the meeting, which you probably heard as we started, so we'll post that on our YouTube and on our website as well. And just as a reminder, the DRCA is a nonpartisan organization. Obviously, I think we're going to talk about a number of political topics this evening. We're facilitating this town hall to provide a forum, but the views and topics are obviously not official positions of the DRCA. So we're excited to be able to bring this session to you. We're excited that Congressman Beyer was willing to join us this evening. We also have a chili cook-off coming up, so we'll try to get into the chat or somewhere details about that, so you can join us this Saturday night. But with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Congressman Beyer. Thank you for being with us.
Elena, thanks so much, and thank you so much for the invitation to be with you tonight. It's more fun to be in person, but I think we maybe get a lot more people, especially on a holiday, on Zoom. So first, happy President's Day. And I say that as we celebrate lots and lots of wonderful presidents over our time. There's a lot to discuss. I really appreciate your time. I'm pleased too that Noah Simon is with us tonight. Noah, for the last 10 years, has been our district chief of staff. So the four people we have out in the district that are trying to handle all the incoming cases are under his leadership. And happily, just in the last year, he moved to Alexandria. So it was a good thing. And I guess congratulations, you have a Delray homeowner in the vice president's mansion, for what that's worth. Let me just begin on the sadder note about the tragedy at National Airport 2.5 weeks ago. It was one of the lowest points of my service. And I really want to express deep thanks to all of the first responders from Alexandria, Arlington, the Coast Guard, the fire folks right there at the airport. They were on the scene in 2 minutes. It's been very difficult on them. I talked to Jack Potter, the general manager of the MWA, the airport authority, last week, and he said, like many scores of them are in EAP right now, just trying to deal with, the emotional difficulties of being in the frigid water and the ice that night, or pulling the bodies out and all that. We owe it to those families and to those we lost to find out what happened and make sure it never happens again. I've been to a couple of the NTSB greetings with the chairman, Jen Homendy, who was an Alexandrian or Arlingtonian. And it'll probably be 18 months before we get a final report, but there's a lot we can do in the meantime. I wrote the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, 10 days ago or so, saying, or maybe it was 2 days afterwards, that no more of these military flights in and around the airport until there's a really thorough analysis of why they should be there at all. I was horrified, I think it was last Thursday, to see the Washington Post story that there have been 105 documented near misses. I confess, I never knew of a single one. We've probably all been on planes that came down to land at DCA and took right back off again because it was too crowded. But what's the FAA been doing? So I support permanently moving the training flights from around the airport to way down the river or way up the river, well out of the National Capital Region. As much as we want to make things safe, we also don't want to make the noise things worse. So no more residential flights. With NOAA's leadership in the last couple of years, we've had both a federal study and a local study paid for by the federal government on increasing the ceilings for the helicopters that are going back and forth to the Pentagon. If they have to stay over 395 or the Beltway, but we're trying to move it from 200 feet to 300 feet to 500 feet, depending on the altitude, just to make the noise smaller. And of course, the biggest thing is trying to use as few of the Marine helicopters as possible. The other obviously huge news is the new presidential administration. Only 25 days old. I confess it feels a bit longer. Many of us, I mean, all of us probably have very strong feelings about the election. It wasn't the result I hoped for, but I do respect America's choice. President Trump clearly won the several battleground states and a plurality of the votes and a clear majority of the Electoral College. I am now in the minority in the House, not much, 217 to 215 right now, but my Republican friends have a trifecta, and good for them. I've got to do my best to defend the values that I feel I was elected to represent. But I remain very committed to working across the aisle for all the good things we can and should be doing together. I mentioned before in Delray civic meetings that I've always tried to, any legislation introduced, to do it with a Republican co-lead. Partly because it's just philosophy, but also it's the smartest way to get things done. If it's bipartisan, it's far more likely to pass. It's also far less likely to be repealed in a subsequent administration. They tend to persist. But there are a bunch of things that have really upset me in these first 25 days with our new president. The first was what I consider the unconscionable pardons for the January 6 attackers. Brian Sicknick, who was the first police officer who died, had 2 strokes that day after he'd been pummeled inside and outside the ring, was a constituent here in Alexandria. Jeff Smith, who was traumatized after the head injury, who was bashed in the head with, I forget what it was, but serious traumatic brain injury, and ended up taking his own life out on the GW Parkway 2 or 3 days later. And Michael Fanone, who's still with us, another Alexandria resident, who was tased repeatedly, really brutalized, and now is sadly a target. We've done everything we can to speak out against this. The second big thing that's really concerned me is that the attack on USAID. USAID was created by an act of Congress and signed by a president, and has thrived through many different presidencies. And I think it's a legitimate policy consideration about whether it should be folded in the State Department. We have taken things out and putting things back into different departments over the years. But what shouldn't happen is for it to be disbanded just by executive authority. And all of the money that was allocated for it, which by the way is less than 0.5% of the federal budget. Our total overseas budget, including the State Department, is less than 1%. We're constantly overcoming this myth that it's a quarter of our budget. It's not. It's a very small amount. In fact, it's 1/20th what our defense budget is. And many military officers have already told me that our defense budget is going to have to go way more than that, just because of the loss that we have in the developing countries. We're taking America as this bright, shining city on the hill and just destroying that perspective. And if we grant that our competition with China is sort of the defining battle for values in the 21st century, we just open the door wide for China's soft power in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa and East Asia. It's a huge step backward for America's role in the world, which greatly concerns me. In the short run, we also have lots of USA contractors who are living here in Northern Virginia who instantly were without a paycheck. There was no grace period. There was no, you get paid for the next 3 months or the next 2 weeks, just boom, gone that day. And much of this will be challenged. And then the larger issues of the attack on federal workers. Some of it is, um, not hard to fight back on. The probationary workers, they are clearly at-will workers for the first 2 years. The greater concern for the many other people who are not at will, who are being locked out of their offices, everything's disappeared from their computer, where they've clearly violated the rule that they can't be fired without cause of some kind. And there will be myriad lawsuits over this as they try to recover one by one. It's difficult for them, and of course it affects all of our communities. I think many on the Hill have been really concerned about the unprecedented power grab by Elon Musk. We are all used to having government people who understand things, who go through confirmation processes and appointments and background checks. And when I was getting ready to go overseas to be ambassador to Switzerland, I think the background check took something like 9 months. And yet we have a bunch of folks like Elon and his young associates, no background checks, who are in there seeing the most sensitive stuff. Again, we're fighting back, but not so much progress yet. And then there are the tariffs to come. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then the biggest thing is going to be the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And many people feel that much of the other stuff, the Gulf of America or taking over Greenland or the Panama Canal, is a way of redirecting attention from the $6 trillion that's on the table with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act renewal. I'll come back to that in a minute because it's interesting and it's complicated and it's really, really important. I'm trying to work as closely as I can with our state and local elected officials. Obviously, I see Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, Jerry Connolly almost every day. We met 2 weeks ago with our new mayor, Gaskins, Aaliyah, and Jeff McKay from Fairfax, Letty Hardy from Falls Church, Colin Takas from Arlington, and many of the board or the local government managers too, the Jim Parajons, just to make sure we're all working together and that they're working together, primarily on the economic impact. We stand to lose more in terms of laying off or losing federal employees than any region in the country. Is it a mini recession? Is it a major recession? I don't know. We're going to have to work really closely together on it. And then how to work with ICE. We know the immigration raids are coming. I think all 4 jurisdictions either have an explicit trust policy or an implicit one that they point to, which says we will obey the law, that none of these are sanctuary cities, and want to work with ICE where appropriate, where the people have committed a crime, where they're a real danger. But at the same time, we're not welcoming them into our schools or our jails. Last week, I met with the 4 school superintendents. Again, all the concerns that are happening with the new administration. The number one thing I had not suspected was that all 4 jurisdictions said they're having an unprecedented number of teachers saying they're not coming back next year, that when school gets out in early June, they're done. And some of this is being driven by the new administration's determination to do away with public service loan forgiveness. Public service loan forgiveness has been around, I think, since the Johnson years, Kennedy years. And given that the average public school teacher in America makes half what the average college-educated non-public school teacher makes, that public school loan forgiveness is the only thing that's been able to keep a lot of the younger teachers in our schools. There's also the issue of students afraid to come to school. The superintendents are trying to keep good track of who's just afraid because of ICE. And then what do they do when ICE shows up at the school? How do they treat that? What are ICE's, what are their responsibilities? What are ICE's prerogatives and the like? It's really important that all of us work closely together to uphold the rights and the freedoms that are the foundation of our democracy. The number one phone call I've had, though, and emails, and they have been ringing off the hook, is if you disagree with the new Trump administration, what do you do? I'll tell you, as a legislator, you feel somewhat powerless because we're not passing any legislation in the next 2 years that will undo what what Donald Trump is doing. Um, there's a lot of work on lawsuits. My last update was Thursday morning. There were more than 70 different lawsuits filed trying to stop things like the impoundment of money. There's a law and then a Supreme Court case that says the president cannot impound money that Congress has authorized and appropriated and passed and signed by a president. What congressionally created departments can he close? The whole challenge to the rule of law. What happens if the president, the Supreme Court's already decided that the president can't be held for crimes committed while he's in office, if he decides to ignore the judicial rulings? He didn't ignore them in his first term. Biden didn't ignore them in his term, but what happens if he does? And basically trying to differentiate what a president can do with his power legitimately and what he cannot. But down the road, taking care of our neighbors is, I think, going to be our greatest responsibility. I had a town hall meeting, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, a week ago, the days blur together, with 14,000 people on it, which is unprecedentedly high for me. And then I heard the one that Mark Warner and Tim Kaine did the other night, had 55,000 folks on it. And again, all 5 of our incoming phone lines are full almost all day long. And we're just trying to guide people as best we can. By the way, members of Congress don't have standing to file lawsuits. If we were in the majority can file a lawsuit as the majority. But so we're appropriate for cheering people on. What we are trying to do already, though, recognizing that there can be a lot of people unemployed in Arlington, Alexandria Falls Church, is thinking about how we can help them land on their feet. We're already talking to the chambers, to the Northern Virginia Technology Council, to just any of the major employers around here, thinking job fairs or the like as we get down the road. We want to help this area recover as quickly as possible and help people get back on their feet. And your participation, trust, are really vital to all this. Shifting a little bit, so Noah's on the call. We did 3,258 individual cases last year, something like 30,000 or so in the last 10 years. So and most of them successfully, not everyone, but 95%. So if you need a passport, immigration help, Social Security, Veterans Affairs, we call Noah the IRS whisperer. He's been really good with all the folks that are laying off of the IRS, up to 20,000 people. You might really need our help. And we are pretty good with the IRS tax advocates in Richmond. So please reach out to us. If it's state or local, we can get you to the right person. And then I don't want to be too dour. I am an optimist. This is a great stress test for our democracy. I know I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are much more depressed than I am, but I think we will get through it. We had a rough session that Congress had just ended. We got absolutely nothing done. It was the least productive in the modern era of Congress. But we still got millions of dollars for infrastructure improvements in Northern Virginia. We got dollars for affordable housing, for crime prevention. We enacted the Fusion Energy Act, which is, very forward-looking. I served on the House Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, which is very bipartisan. Produced not just a 250-page report, but actually 14 different pieces of legislation, with all 24 Democrats and Republicans co-sponsoring it. I am the new co-chair of the House Mental Health Caucus. We've got wonderful 2 Republicans on board and a Democrat from Oregon. We're going to be specifically focusing on serious mental illness, on schizophrenia, and on really the deep cases of bipolar depression. This is where our homelessness comes from. This is where, well, if you talk to Sean Casey or the sheriffs, Stacey Kincaid or Jose in Arlington, they'll tell you more than half of their people in their prison right now have a serious mental illness. You just don't get arrested these days, except unless you're in the small category of truly evil people or your life is totally screwed up. I'm also continuing in my 10th year leading the Suicide Prevention Task Force. That was the reason I got involved in AI in the first place, and we keep trying to move the needle as much as we can. The good news is the 988 number, which went into effect now 2.5 years ago, the new suicide hotline, had 7 million calls last year. That's double what we had before the 988 number went in place. And again, the success ratio, the stay alive ratio, is pushing 99% if you call the hotline. I also chair the AI caucus, and I have lots of bills that I'm not going to tell you about them because none of them are going to pass in this 2 years. But I still work really hard on them because some of them will pass. And many of them, you do the work and good things happen even though you don't get a piece of legislation. Probably the thing that I'm most excited about is the progress we're making on fusion energy, the energy of the sun. Two hydrogen atoms slammed together to make a helium atom. I founded the caucus. I have 120 bipartisan members on it right now. We are getting ever closer to doing on the planet Earth what has never happened. And I was pleased that our Virginia governor announced a couple of weeks ago that the first fusion energy plant, actual factory in the world, will be in Virginia, in Chesterfield County. Commonwealth Fusion in Massachusetts, which is a spinoff of MIT, is due to turn on its first fusion reactor next year, 2026, without radioactive tritium in it. So it won't generate any power. But then 2027, they will introduce that, and it should generate an enormous amount of power. They're not the only bet. We have 28 different companies in America racing to be the first. Helion in Seattle is due to turn its on in 2028. TAE, which I think is the most sophisticated in Southern California, turn its on in 2030. It will be just really exciting for climate change, for poverty, for low price energy for all of us. And I don't want to overstate, but I think it will be the most exciting thing to happen since fire. Moving to tax, I serve on the Ways and Means Committee. I'm also the ranking Democrat on the Joint Economic Committee. And I serve on both the Tax Subcommittee and the Trade Subcommittee. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was the signature achievement of Donald Trump's first administration, December 2017, much of it expires this year. And so there will be major debates about what it looks like going forward. The one that's probably most relevant to all of us personally is the deduction for state and local taxes, the so-called SALT deduction. It's been around since the Civil War. In the early Trump TCJA, they capped it at $10,000. Which means the first $10,000 of your Virginia state taxes, of your Alexandria property taxes, of your car taxes to the city, things like that. You can deduct the first $10,000, but everything else is taxable income. That's very different from what it was before, just January 1, 2018. I've seen numbers as high as $10,000 and $6,000 per person in Northern Virginia of extra taxes that we're paying because of it. In high tax areas, there are Republicans, Michael Lawler in New York, Ken Calvert in California, who have said that their support for Trump tax continuations is dependent on either getting rid of the SALT cap or raising it. Some of the provisions are $50,000, $80,000. Democrat, it's hard to support doing away with it completely because then the very wealthy among us get almost all the tax break. But nevertheless, we'll be fighting for significant SALT tax relief. The child tax credit we had the first year Joe Biden was in office, they came with the American Rescue Plan, the most generous we've ever had. We cut the number of children in poverty in America to 5%, the lowest in the history of the company. It went away at the end of 2021. It's back up to 13% children living in poverty right now. In a bipartisan way, we reduced it, not the full child tax credit from Biden, but still a significant one in a bipartisan way in the House. And it passed, I think there were 40 negative votes. It was actually led by the Republican chair, Jason Smith, on Ways and Means, but it never went anywhere in the Senate. We're very much hoping that some support for families will happen in this TCJA discussion. One of my biggest concerns is the 199A, not to get into the deep weeds, but this is the thing that made sure that if you were a small business or medium-sized business that was an LLC corporation or partnership, that you weren't paying twice the taxes that a corporation's paying. Corporate rate now is 21%. The effective rate is actually 8%. And without the 199.8, most small businesses would be paying 37 or 38 or 39%. And then finally, the estate tax right now, the first $28,400,000 of your estate are tax-free to your kids. My daughter often points out, she says, Dad, you have already been taxed on it. And I point out that, yes, I have, but she hasn't been. But anyway, the dilemma is that only 1,100 families in America every year pay any estate tax at all. So I guess one of my goals will be not to take it back to $1 million or 500,000, but to take it back to where it was before TCJA, was to about 14 million. Finally, the tariffs. I confess, not everyone agrees with me. I hate them. I was an econ major at school. I've studied a lot of economics, and I just never seen tariffs doing any good for anybody. Smoot-Hawley tariffs in the 30s gave us the Great Depression that took years and years to get out of. Would Trump put them on steel and aluminum, and Joe Biden kept them on steel and aluminum. And the net result was that our use of steel and aluminum declined over the last 8 years, and the job thing didn't pick up at all. In fact, you've probably followed all the debate about the Japanese steel company trying to buy U.S. steel. All that they do is push up our prices. The tariffs are not paid by the country we slap the tariffs on, but by American consumers who are buying overseas goods. Anyway, there's lots to worry about. There's lots of hard work to be done. Thank you so much for being part of this discussion tonight, because it just shows me how engaged you are in what's happening in our community. And with that, I've left many things out. Please don't hesitate to disagree with me. Eager to hear your concerns. And Elaine, I'll kick it back to you.
I'm sure you would expect nothing less than high engagement from a community like Alexandria and Delray. We've got a ton of questions. I'm trying to sort of collate them. One topic that there are a ton of different questions about is around Elon Musk and Doge, and specifically about the amount of our data that they have access to, right? Treasury records, IRS records, all kinds of information about your constituents, including both federal employees and non. Can you talk a little bit about what can be done about that, and what concerns we should have?
Yeah, Elena, there's nothing like in terms of congressional procedural tools that we can do. We can write letters. We're on lots of letters, and we can do rallies. The most important tool right now are the courts. There's a very clear law, 6103, that makes it illegal for an unauthorized person to access the tax data on any one of us. And we're very, very careful about this. On Ways and Means, we have had 2 or 3 occasions in my 10 years to try to look at someone else's tax returns. For example, there was Donald Trump's tax returns. It took 3 years of legal work for one person, just the chair of the committee, to be able to see just some parts of it. And all of us have gone through massive security clearances. And yet you have Elon in there, to the best of my knowledge, no security clearance. And then the youngsters, I'm sure who are, brilliant coders, but they have no business being in there. And there's been no instance that we know of yet of them putting the information, using the information incorrectly, sharing it with China, banking it away. But the fact that they're in there and what the possible consequences are down the road is pretty scary. So once they're into the payment system, first of all, they've got your name, your address, your social security number, where you work. But then if you've ever gotten a tax refund directly to your bank account or transferred directly from your bank account to the IRS, they have your bank information too. And that's also in that, to the extent that they get into the HHS systems, they got Medicaid and Medicare, so they have a lot of the health records too. So it's really, really concerning. And there are a bunch of lawsuits out there specifically trying to address that. And now I know Musk has come back and said, oh no, we're not doing that. And I want to believe him, but we also need to use the rule of law to make sure that it's not happening. But by the way, for those of you interested in the lawsuits, there is a website called Just Litigation. I think it's called maybe or justlawsuits.com. I think it's just justlitigation.com that is supposed to have all the lawsuits that are in place on the various things that have come out of the last 24 days.
There was another question a little bit lower down in the chat asking, will Congress be requesting a final detailed report from DOJ about their findings, or do we just have to kind of read it on X and take that as fact?
No, I definitely think they will be asking for it, and I would be surprised if we don't get one. The originally DOJ was completely extra governmental. Now in the House Oversight Committee, which is now the Democratic lead is now Jerry Connolly, which I think is great for Northern Virginia. Jerry, worked on the Hill for years, worked in private in government contracting for years, and has been on that oversight committee since 2009. He knows it really well. But there's a subcommittee there led by, interestingly, Marjorie Taylor Greene on the Republican side, and a woman from Albuquerque, Melanie Stansbury, on the Democratic side, and a bunch of smart people on it who are supposed to be doing all the oversight of DOJ and Elon Musk, and almost certainly will demand a written report at the end. Now, the reason I say I wouldn't be surprised is because they are, as any administration does almost continuously, you find stupid projects or silly projects or projects misnamed. We had this at the National Science Foundation in the Trump administration, where there were you heard about the study and say, why are we spending taxpayer money on that? Having also worked in and around big corporations, don't be surprised that there's waste, fraud, and abuse in big corporations too, even in family businesses. So they will talk about that, and that's fine. And I don't think anybody objects to them saying that's, by the way, there was never $100 million for condoms in Gaza. That was a complete fabrication. But if there was $100 million for condoms in Gaza, we would say that's crazy, get rid of it. And that's the kind of thing that will be in the report. The concern I have, as somebody who actually is very fiscally conservative, is they're not thinking about the actual ways to save money. Now, laying off 220,000 probationary employees, that does save money. That saves a lot. The challenge we read today in the AP was that they've laid off, I forget the number, I think it was 6,000 people at the FAA. Don't quote me on the number, but it's a big number. It's like you can't lay off a bunch of people at the FAA when you've had 6 plane crashes already, and you just had the thing at Nashville because you were an air traffic controller short, among other reasons. And when you're air traffic controller short at virtually every airport in the country, this needs to be done intelligently. It needs to be done with a sense of wisdom to it.
We've gotten a couple of questions about the forthcoming budget negotiation and how it can be leveraged to address what's going on with the administration. Can you talk about that?
A wonderful question, and I was bad on me for not mentioning that in my so-called prepared remarks, because that is the two legislative tools that we have are, number one, the budget. We have a continuing resolution that's kept the government open, but it expires March 14th. We have seen again and again and again and again that my Republican colleagues cannot pass a budget with just Republicans because there's a subset, the Freedom Caucus, that has never voted for a budget and never will. As long as the budget isn't balanced, and we're $2 trillion away from that, then they're not going to do that. This includes, say, Morgan Griffith from Southwest Virginia, and John McGuire from not Winchester, anyway, the 5th district and district. They're never voting for a budget. So it's always been dependent. It's always been a majority of Democrats, and in fact, almost all Democrats and a majority of Republicans passing the budgets. And that, since they need us, we should have some impact on some of the things that are happening. Because I think even however you characterize this government, and I won't use the strong language that my wife uses, it still needs to function. I mean, Donald Trump can't be a successful president if the government doesn't function. So we have some leverage there. The other leverage is we hit the debt ceiling about January 1st. And so right now we're using so-called special measures to pay our bills. That needs to be negotiated also. And they're going to, once again, there are a significant subset of Republicans who would never vote to increase the debt ceiling, much less get rid of it, which is what our current president wants to do.
All right, I'm going to try to paraphrase a number of questions that are urgent in sounding and encouraging or expressing concern that I'll put it in my own words, but I think a number of people are upvoting this and saying it. it feels like there's not enough urgency among Democrats right now, that there is an emergency happening with our government. Can you talk about that? Talk about, when we hear people talking about bipartisanship, I think for some of us, it feels like the time for that has passed. How does that feel to you?
Um, First of all, I completely understand it. And in fact, I was surprised it wasn't the first through 25th question, because it's certainly all anybody talks to me about. And I think to every one of my Democratic friends at a minimum, probably not my Republican friends. And everyone is struggling trying to figure out how do we make um, obvious the things that we're doing, and how do we communicate the many, many different things that are going on behind the scenes, and what does urgency mean? Um, you know, let me just throw out 4 or 5 different things. So you have the big rallies. I think there was one this afternoon at the Tesla store, right? People have said we need to gum up the works in the House. In the first Biden 2 years, the Republicans did that in the House. I actually, because it was during COVID, I cast 5,000 proxy votes. The only reason I cast 5,000 proxy votes is because they insisted on a recorded vote on every single thing. Every naming of a post office had to have a recorded vote. And there's a motion to adjourn a couple of times every day. They gummed up the works a great deal. But what happened? Absolutely nothing. Biden still passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the Chips and Science Act, the biggest infrastructure bill, the first gun bill in 30 years. It maybe looked on TV for the handful of people watching C-SPAN, but it didn't do anything. So we're actually trying to think what can we do that actually does something that changes the outcome. Some of my friends from the civil rights movement have suggested, just moving to civil disobedience, a la Nelson Mandela or Gandhi or the like. And we may not be too far from that, but in the meantime, there's lots and lots of lawsuits. There's enormous numbers of press conferences. One of the things we lack, and I'm speaking as a Democrat, so I apologize to my Republican friends on the call, is we lack that single voice, equivalent to a president, who can have the press conference at 9 o'clock every morning and tell you everything good that's happening, tell you everything bad that's happening, and ask what you can do that day. And I'm very much hoping that that person, whether it's Hakeem Jeffries or Pete Buttigieg or whoever, emerges soon to be the person who's carrying that message of the urgency and everything that we're doing. But I promise you, none of us are sleeping much. We feel the fear and the anxiety and the need to do something meaningful. In the meantime, we're getting back to Michelle Obama's just do something.
Someone asked, for those of us who generally agree with your positions and with Senator Kane's and Warner's, is it constructive to call your offices with our concerns, or does that just take up your time? Can you count this comment as 200 calls?
Yeah, no, it's fine. We love it when you call, and often we're able to help something else as part of the call, and it's we love calling. I don't ever want to. I've heard that there are occasional Democrats who say, "Stop calling us, call the Republicans." I would just say, "Call me," and then also call the Republican. For Rob Whitman in the first district, he's a smart guy. Jen Kiggins, who's the Virginia second district, she's a nice person. I mean, you try to move the Republicans. Right now, they're afraid. If Sunday Donald Trump's mandate isn't quite as strong as it is right now, his 53% approval rating doesn't stay at 53%. Maybe we can get some moderating help from them, especially if you call them and encourage them.
Are there other things we can be doing in addition to calling members of Congress? What can the average citizen be doing to put pressure on the administration, either directly or indirectly?
I think whenever numbers always help. No one has called yet, or at least nothing's been formally organized yet for, a region-wide rally or a national rally or things like that. But I remember the 2 million women who gathered the day after the inauguration 8 years ago. It was supposed to be a march, but no one could move because there were so many people. Those things have an impact. That they change public opinion. And ultimately, my belief in the strength of our democracy tells me that the ultimate defense against the bad things that Donald Trump is trying to do, not the good things, and by that's my value judgment, is public opinion. That he cannot go too much against public opinion without retreating, without coming back from that. I saw Chris Matthews the other night, who's been following politics for a long time, and he made the comment, which I'd never thought before, that he described Donald Trump as a good listener, that he knows where his base is, and when he goes too far, he retreats from it. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I do think that he's still going to be subject to public opinion. So our goal is to educate the public so that the public opinion is based on the facts as best we can present them, as best we know them. And I think in general, if you just know, for example, what we're trying to do is put up stories on our website of every federal worker who is brave enough, foolish enough to put the story up, or even with the faces blurred, or just a text or just a voice, especially those coming back from the overseas countries, to talk about what does it mean when you're not feeding children in Somalia or Sudan? What does it mean when people in Uganda aren't getting the PEPFAR vaccine and they're dying right away? What does it mean for children dying from malaria? What does it mean for the farmers in the Midwest who can't export their crops anymore, so they're sitting there rotting? Someone made the comment the other day, and it may be apocryphal, that it sounds so apocryphal I don't even want to say it, but that there's a lot of money being wasted in the goods that are being destroyed in warehouses right now that were to be shipped overseas, grains and the like. They're just going bad. I don't know how much offset it is with other things, but there are stories to tell, real human stories that will help people understand the impacts of these things. But by the way, we haven't even touched on the actual budget resolution the Budget Committee passed after 13 hours of debate on Thursday, which calls for $1.5 trillion in budget cuts over the next 10 years. That, as someone who worries about the $37 trillion in public debt, I'm fascinated to see what they're going to do, because the only three levers for really changing the public debt on the expense side are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And one of the things Donald Trump promised all through the campaign was to get rid of Medicaid expansion, which was the expansion that came little by little, state by state, during the teens. Virginia didn't do it till I think 2019. But it was 600,000 Virginians right now are on Medicaid expansion. So if that budget, that they eliminate Medicaid expansion, that's 600,000 Virginians who go from health insurance to no health insurance. And if they then also eliminate the tax premium for Affordable Care Act premiums, I don't know the number, but that again is going to be another scores, if not hundreds of thousands of Virginians who won't be able to afford the Affordable Care Act that they have right now. What then does that do to the strain on local services? As one thoughtful economist pointed out last week, for every benefit that we take away that goes to the American people from the federal government, it becomes the burden on state and local governments to provide. So, it may balance our federal budget or move in that direction, but then you're going to be looking to Richmond and looking to City Hall to pick it up. Elena, let me just throw one other really interesting thing out. There was a great study in Cardinal News last week, or was printed there, but it's about the jurisdictions in America that the percentage of their jurisdictional GDP that came from federal government transfer payments. And not surprisingly, they were almost all the high ones were red. The highest one in Virginia was Buchanan County, down where Grundy is, and in the coal fields, where better than 65% of the county's GDP, as all the citizens' income put together, 65% came in federal government transfer payments. And the lowest jurisdiction in America was Arlington, Virginia, at 3.6%. And I didn't see Alexandria's, but Alexandria's is among the lowest also. So we're getting very little in terms of transfer payments. We are doing well, though, and obviously in terms of federal employees.
Maybe this is a good time to dig in a little bit around how local governments should be getting prepared for some of the plans that this administration is unleashing, what we should be thinking about, what we should be looking to our local leaders to be doing, and how you and other federal leaders are working with them to do that.
Yeah. Just give one other example.
Sure. Yeah.
In the last Republican budget, they cut 80% of the Title I money for our schools. And that's mostly with the Department of Education, which only has 12,000 employees total, by the way, out of the 2 million non-service federal employees. And all of the schools in Bailey's Crossroads and most of the schools on the Route 1 corridor south of Alexandria are heavily dependent on that Title I money for the teachers and for the breakfast and lunches that they get. So Title I money goes away, so does breakfast, so does lunch, so do the teacher aides. And that's going to then come right back to Fairfax County, Alexandria, and Richmond to try to figure out, do they want to pick that up again? And how do we pay for it?
Let's see. What are Democrats doing to counteract this administration's attempt to erase and discriminate against trans and queer people?
Again, I can't tell you anything new. Their lawsuits. I was thrilled by the judge the other day that put on hold a lot of the anti-trans stuff that Donald Trump has done. That will be appealed. I'm fairly confident the appeals court will hold it up. No one is quite sure what happens when it goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is trying to fast track the most important of these lawsuits. Again, as a born optimist, I'm hoping that, I know there are two that will never vote for any of these stays, but that some of the other ones have shown an ability to try to view things independently of politics, which I think will be good. In the meantime, I don't want this to sound, well, it's going to sound weak to some people anyway. Still, the most important thing we can always do is take care of our own families, our own selves, our own communities. Make sure that ALIVE and the Alexandria Tutoring Consortium, the Act for Alexandria, and all the good things, the Child and Family Network Center, all these things that we have right here are robust and strong, and we take care of our neighbors, even if the federal government's not taking care of them in the short run, which includes any of our trans friends. 10 years ago, I never knew a trans person, and now I have quite a number of friends who have trans children, and I have one staffer who has a trans parent. We're moved into a different age, and I go back to my basic Catholic upbringing, that our job is to love everybody, all God's children. By the way, I served with Sarah McBride, and she's charming and determined not to make her trans personality why she's there. She's not leading any trans marches or using the women's bathroom. She just wants to be on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee.
There's a question here, and I'll read it verbatim. It says, I'm a federal employee and scientist at the National Science Foundation and a resident of Alexandria. Are you aware that NSF is gearing up to fire all of its early career scientists tomorrow? I'm one of those scientists.
I was not aware of that, and I don't even know what the protections are at NSF. We did a press conference last week and a long House floor speech on all the things they've been throwing at the NSF, including reviewing. You've probably seen the long list of words that can't be used anymore, including women, gender, proportional, Black. They just bake in anything, not just DEI, but DEI times 100 as suggested things that are culturally inappropriate, which I can't understand. I always hated cancel culture and always thought My conservative friends that hated cancel culture were right about it, but they've taken cancel culture to an absolutely new level, and just canceled anything that seems to be woke. It's it's the it's over wokeness. In any case, um, we'd be happy to try to work with you if you get fired tomorrow. And again, if the firing is illegal, we will be happy to try to point you in the direction. George Mason University, by the way, has set up a whole unit of pro bono lawyers to help people who think they have a valid claim to claim it, and we can guide you in that direction.
Are there any other resources that that people who are on the call who may be federal employees, may be laid off or may be facing that or thinking about that should be aware of? We can put them in the chat here, or we can make sure they know how to get in touch with Noah or your office. Where should we point people?
I may kick that to Noah just in case he has any good ideas that I haven't
I
mentioned.
bet he does.
Well, I'd like to say we had some magical solution to this. I'll put my email in there. I found that talking to people and talking through often leads to something where we can be helpful. The congressman is meeting with the chambers of commerce and economic development heads here coming up shortly, as well as the 4 mayors and board chairs this Friday, really to talk about what is everybody doing, what can be done, what can we do, putting our heads together to support those that have already been laid off and the others that we know are coming. So I'll put my email and my cell phone in here. Please do reach out to me.
And Elena to our National Science Foundation, young scientist. Part and parcel of this is changing the expense ratio that they're giving to the universities. We wrote a big letter on behalf of Virginia Tech, which is one of the top 10 research universities in the nation right now. And they are really hurting when their reimbursement gets cut from whatever the 45% down to 10% for overhead. And the overhead is what pays for the building, the electricity, the heat, the lab equipment. So it's a major ding on science. And if they fire the young scientists at the National Science Foundation, yet another thing is like, how do we maintain our competitive position in the world? I mentioned earlier my excitement about fusion energy. We're turning out about 100 fusion, plasma scientists, PhDs a year. China's turning out 1,000, 10 times as many as we are. So, you can't say, oh, we're competing against China if we're just turning away from the most important type of competition we have, which is our innovation and our knowledge and our research and our science.
We've had a few questions about how you see either the continuing resolution or budget discussion going in March. And then along that line, there's one that's been upvoted quite a bit that just says, are you willing to shut down the government for a long period of time in order to get things done and return the power of the purse to Congress?
Yeah. The first question is easier. I know our so-called four corners, which is Rosa DeLauro, the lead Democrat in the House, and Tom Cole, the lead Republican in the House, Patty Murray. They all say they're on the same page and they're confident we can get it done on March 14th. I've been hearing that for 6 or 7 months, and I don't know why I believe it now. I think we're just up to the appropriators, it would be fine, but the big bosses keep, the speaker and people like that keep making changes in there. And I think it's quite possible that we won't have a budget on March 14th. The harder question is, should we shut the government down? I personally have never wanted to shut the government down. And not just because I represent Northern Virginia, but because I'm in politics, because I think a good government, a government that works and is effective, is good for the people. And shutting it down doesn't really help anybody. However, I don't want to say that Democratic leadership won't say by that time that the urgency demands that a shutdown is the most effective tool we have. I don't want that to be true, but it might be a month from now. And certainly The word right now from the Hakeem Jeffries and the Chuck Schumers of the world, and the top leadership circles around them is that we do not want to shut down. But that doesn't mean that someone along the way won't say the most profound act of civil disobedience we can do is not setting ourselves on fire in front of the Pentagon or having a hunger strike in front of the White House. That latter I have considered, but rather a shutdown. I'm sorry if that's a fuzzy answer. It's an honest one, but.
Can you talk a little bit about, if there's any difference in texture between what you see from your Republican colleagues publicly in terms of their support for the administration and what conversations you may be having privately? There's a question in the chat. Can you get any moderate Republicans to see the light about this government? My guess would be those conversations happen privately and not where we see them. What are you?
Yeah. The answer is no, but that's only because I haven't had that direct experience. I have the wonderful advantage of living close to the Capitol when I sleep in my own bed every night and drive myself to work. So I'm not hanging around the Hill at night, going out to dinner with the folks. And that's where a lot of those conversations happen. So I've not really had any one-on-ones with Republicans off the Hill. And on the Hill, they're very careful. No one wants to be quoted. People have been burned by having people have recording devices in their pocket, their phone turned on record. No one's going to say that there. The congressional trips, when you occasionally go abroad or someplace, that's when you get a lot more honest discussion. And I haven't been on any of those this year, and it seems inappropriate to leave while things are in such flux. However, I know this is going to sound, again, too kumbaya, but there are a lot of very good people who are Republican members, people that I like, even if I don't vote with them. And I confess I'm disappointed with most of them right now, but I also understand their fear that, especially if they're younger, if they're my age, so you get beat. But when they're 40 years old and they want to have a life of public service, to cross Donald Trump means to end their career right now. And so they do it with great hesitation. And the ones who do it, the Liz Cheneys and Adam Kinzingers, and you see what happens to them. They're pariahs. Or they just don't run again. And there were a bunch that didn't run again this year because they couldn't stand it. And it's a winnowing process, but the winnowing is not in the right direction.
Realize that we're coming up on our last few minutes with you. Are there any sort of final words? I don't know if I assume you can see the Q&A. If there's anything Noah or you want to sort of pull out of there an answer, or if there are any final words you want to leave us with, maybe want to give the last few minutes to you and just let you tell us any last words of wisdom that you want to share.
Well, I'm wondering if Noah is there a way of copying all those questions?
We can get I'm sure we can get all the questions down for you and get them over to you.
Okay, good. Because Elena, what we can do is answer them all, and we'll just get them in a document and send it back to you.
Great. If you want to do that, we can put it up on our website and get it out to our membership.
Yeah. Well, we will do that as best we can, and that way you have the advantage of all the smart people who work with me, not just me. And the only thing I'd say is hang in there. I was a huge fan of Dag Hammarskjöld, who used to be, Secretary General of the UN, died in a plane crash over Africa. He wrote poetry, and among other wonderful lines, he said, "Is that at bottom all life asks of us is that we live it with courage." These are hard times, but our parents and grandparents had World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, the Cold War, Vietnam, the Great Recession, COVID, 9/11. We've been through a lot of really bad stuff over the years, and we're still here, and we're 249 years old. I deeply believe we will get through this too. we don't get to be 249 years old without a lot of accidental. And I really do deeply believe that most Americans are good people who want to do the right thing and love their country. And to the extent that what this administration does is bad for our country, there will be payback. And, if there are good things, like he gets rid of carried interest, or we find out who actually killed John Kennedy, then, then we should celebrate the good things too.
Well,
And thank you
really
for giving me this hour and for being so patient and being interested in all this.
thank you for
You're wonderful
offering to
citizens.
do it.
And thank you for giving me the honor to represent you. It's the highlight of my life, and I'm very grateful. And I'll do my best.
Well, we really appreciate you spending the hour with us. Love to see you at the chili cook-off this weekend. We'll be at Commonwealth Academy on Saturday night, tasting all of the neighborhood's finest chili and raising money for Blessings in a Backpack at Mount Vernon Community School, as well as to support Cora Kelly for students who are food insecure. So Delray folks, you can find all the details for that on our website, and you can too, Congressman. But yeah, thank you so much, Noah, for putting this together, and Congressman for spending the hour with us. We'll have all of this up on our YouTube and on our website. We'll circulate it so that people can get those answers to the questions that we didn't have time to get to as well. And thanks for that offer. Thank you so
Elaine,
much.
thank all
Thanks
of you.
everybody for being here.
Okay. Good night. Thanks so much.
Take care. Good night.